How's it going, boys? Today we found out the most brutal ways people were sent back to the lobby. The big pearly gates up in the sky. And honestly, some of these methods had me quaking in my boots a little bit, but you know, we stood strong. If you're new here, drop a like and I'll catch you later. I should try Genshin Impact or Zenless Zone Zero. You know, that should be on the list of most brutal human deaths.
Ever heard of the show 1,000 Ways to Die?
Absolutely.
Well, if you take a look at our 300,000 years of history...
Wait, wasn't like Dumb Ways to Die a video game? I think I recall that being a video game.
You'll soon come to realize that 1,000 isn't nowhere close to cutting it. Try more like 1,000,000, if even that's enough. And through the ages, people have had to endure some pretty painful demises, some of which were definitely worse than others. But thankfully, thanks to technology and general progress, horrific endings are becoming less common than they used to be. Especially because of just how tough ancient Earth was compared to now.
You know, I always thought about this, like, you know, like with plants on like what's edible and what's not edible. There has to be like one person to try it out initially, just so you know if it's poisonous or not. I just earned a new subscriber. I appreciate you.
And we can only guess what kind of bowl our ancestors had to go through. But once in a while, we don't have to, as occasionally,
I remember everyone in
researchers will
chat.
get really lucky at the expense of a seriously unfortunate individual. And we get to see firsthand some of the
stream started 17 minutes and 32 seconds ago. You were not late.
Catastrophic injuries that ancient people had to endure, and sometimes even survived. But the first case definitely wasn't a survive kind of situation. And unfortunately, is a mode of death still within the realm of possibility, as it was a shark attack. But not just any old shark attack, but rather the first conclusive one recorded in history.
The first shark
An achievement
attack?
that certainly nobody wants to have, but nonetheless goes to a 3,400-year-old hunter-gatherer from Japan, simply dubbed Tsukumo 24. The discovery was made in 2021 off the coast of the Seto Inland Sea, where researchers located a male human skeleton in really rough condition, being absolutely covered in lacerations that spread across his arms, chest, abdomen, and hands.
What kind of sharks did they have back in the day,
dude? Researchers were quite
dude?
horrified and confused, as they were so deep that they marked bone, and matched what was seen in wounds caused by metal weapons, not animals or non-metal tools like a stone knife. What's more is that they weren't just looking at a few cuts, and not even a dozen or two, but instead over 500, 790 to be precise. And what made everything all the more weird was that the man had belonged to the Joman culture, in which
I should eat some Sri Lankan food. It's absolutely heaven but spicy. You know, that's probably on this list of most brutal deaths, dude. You know, it gets to a certain point where, like, I mean, I'm a big fan of spice. I'm a big fan of spice, but at the same time, like, it even gets to a point with me. Like, how is this enjoyable?
metalwork was absent, meaning
I only like a spicy chicken sandwich with cheese and bacon from Popeyes. I'm actually going to be getting that today.
it wasn't some deranged serial killer that had caused this with a metal weapon. Therefore, they took another look at the injuries and noticed this
You know, I'll die in the bathroom tomorrow morning, okay?
time around that they were V-shaped and identical to those seen in modern-day shark attacks.
Yo!
This, in conjunction to his location, which
It
was on
ripped the
archipelago,
bro's head
led
off.
to the conclusion that a large tiger shark or great white had killed him, and it really did a number on him during the attack, administering multiple injuries that were fatal within their own right.
Bro, getting
including
attacked
the fracture or
by a great white shark has to be up there in terms of fear. Like, has to be up there. Now, I mean, a giant great, like a 15, 20 foot great white shark. You're swimming in the ocean and you go underneath and you see that giant mass of like flesh coming at you. I don't care who you are, dude. You're frantically swimming away from that.
tearing of every rib, the evisceration of his chest cavity and abdomen, and to top it all off, multiple dismemberments, which included both his feet and left hand. These missing extremities also helped to tell researchers
You gotta
that the
punch
poor
him in the
bloke
nose.
was alive in the initial attack, since he likely used his hands and feet to defend himself, during which they were then bit off. This got rid of the possibility of the whole thing being a scavenging event as opposed to an attack, but led to a new question of why the
You
shark had
low-key
attacked him
want
in
to
the
see a
first place,
megalodon?
as it was his left leg
Imagine like a blue whale, but a little bit girthier and with teeth that could slice you in half.
that bore the most deep bites, heavily implying an unprovoked ambush attack. And the answer was hidden in his
Reminds
bizarre
you of
final resting
Dracula?
place. Opposed to being found at sea, as one would expect, or in a place that was once submerged,
Thank you.
the victim was found in a traditional burial site, and his bodies did not show signs of being in the water for long, meaning that he likely wasn't alone at the time of the attack. And given that the Jomon people were exceptional fishers,
I think
the current
megalodons
belief
are
is that a
extinct.
group of people had gone out on a boat to catch fish. At some point during the fishing excursion, the unlucky man had left the boat and got into the water to perhaps spearfish or to simply bring up a catch, not knowing that the spilled blood in the water.
Like, bro, I mean, like, let's just say you're underneath the water, okay? Like, you're in the ocean, you're underneath the water, you see this thing floating at you. Like, what do you do? It's like a semi-truck, but with teeth. What do you do? I know you punch it in the mouth, dude, but like, no, not in the mouth. You punch it in the nose, dude. You punch it in the nose because that's where they're most sensitive, but at the same time, when their mouth can, like, swallow half your torso.
Had attracted a shark, which,
bro, I love nurse sharks and lemon sharks are nice. I like the name. Lemon sharks?
then swiftly attacked him. Seeing he was in danger and under
Yeah,
attack,
you never know, dude.
the others that were with him then came to the rescue and pulled him up. But it was already too late, and the only thing they could do was bury him, as he likely died well before reaching the shore.
How's it
Now, if
going,
you're planning a
Izzy
trip to Japan,
Wizzy?
don't panic quite yet. Yes, there are still sharks there now, but the situation was much dicier back then, with a number of known shark teeth implying that their populations.
If you guys don't know what we're watching, or if you're just hopping on in, we're looking at the most brutal human deaths ever discovered right before we hop into hardcore Minecraft, okay?
were significantly higher than they are now. And this is also reflected by the Jomon culture, which features multiple art pieces that depict various sharks, namely hammerheads and tiger sharks. So it's likely that attacks were much more common back then. Now clearly, this particular incident had a rather regrettable ending. But not all horrific injuries ended so poorly, as sometimes ancient humans not only survived traumatic wounds, but even thrived afterwards.
Really?
As best showcased by the world's oldest known amputation, which dates back to 31,000 years ago. For a long time,
They did like a sacrificial ritual to seal the wound with arcane magic. That's how they thrived.
researchers have been well aware that amputations occurred before modern medicine, but previously, the oldest known case was only 7,000 years old, involving a Neolithic farmer from Europe. So everyone was pretty excited when in 2020, a group of scientists stumbled upon a much older specimen in Borneo that bore signs of a successful amputation. The individual in question was found in the Liang Tibo cave, and notably was missing its left leg and foot. At first, there was an idea that it was lost in some traumatic accident, which then possibly killed the individual. Yet researchers noticed that not only was the wound extremely clean, but it was also healed and seemed.
You know, I always wondered, like, when stuff like this happens, how do they just not die immediately afterward when a sneeze could kill you back in the day? Your brother sneezing on you. Bam, dead the next day.
And the rest of the leg was
You get
partially withered
infected
and
so easily,
child-sized,
dude.
while the specimen overall was clearly a young adult, making an amputation as a child
mean, they had
the likely
herbs.
scenario. Now, because this took place over 30,000 years ago, painkillers were probably absent, and the amputation would have occurred with a sharpened stone tool. And yet somehow,
Hopefully
the
it was
ancient surgeon
obsidian.
not only managed to finesse their way around veins, arteries,
You know, obsidian is actually sharper than a surgical knife when freshly cut from the stone.
nerves, and tissue, but kept the area completely free of infection, a feat
Heck
still
yeah.
impressive by modern standards, as some studies report an infection rate of up to 40% after major amputations. And the
You're
prehistoric
learning how to
individual went on
fly,
to survive
so you'll
into
come back in
adulthood,
30 minutes.
only dying
I'll
in their
catch
20s
you later,
from
dude.
something unrelated and currently unknown. But now, this all begs the question, why did they need an amputation in the first place? A possible idea is that it had something to do with the area that they lived, as the terrain surrounding the cave is extremely rugged, elevated, and littered with large rocks and cliffs. Therefore, the person could have taken a particularly nasty fall or got hit by a rock that mangled their leg to the point that amputation was necessary. And while it's thought that they
Gets
survived
hit
for
with
nearly a decade
landslide.
after the incident, it would not have been easy, as they still needed to navigate a mountainous area with just one leg. And therefore, they must have relied quite a bit on others for care, demonstrating one of the earlier cases of human compassion. But alas, we also know that humans in the past, and present for that matter, can be quite cruel. And you know this all too well if you saw my recent video about the Neolithic bottleneck. That was a period of unusually cruel violence, which could be downright horrifying to say the least. And one of the worst cases of it was seen in the girls of St. Paul Troy, Chateau, France. This grisly discovery involved 3 women who were found buried together back in the 80s, but dated to about 5,500 years ago. and only recently did scientists unveil that a cruel sacrificial ritual
What?
had taken place.
You know, some people would pay for this type of treatment nowadays.
In total, 3 victims were found, and yet 2 of them were buried in very contorted positions and stuffed into very tight spaces, while being completely covered by heavy grindstones.
Yeah, don't fly
likely meant
that
to
way,
keep them down
Lordo.
and from moving, signifying that these 2 had been buried alive.
Don't
and
jump
against
off
their
the
will.
roof.
Furthermore, the positions of their arms and legs
In
suggested
GTA.
that while decayed now, a rope had at some point not only bound them, but tied their legs to their necks, causing them to involuntarily strangle themselves, and coincidentally, mirroring a torturous killing
Okay, never mind. Someone will not pay for that. Maybe like if they weren't strangling themselves.
tactic sometimes used by the Italian mafia, named incapacitamento.
I mean, bondage does exist, but like this form, not.
However, while mafias do it today for revenge against traitors, these Neolithic murders were some sort of agricultural sacrifice.
I
as their
take back
burden
everything that I
structure
said.
had mimicked a silo grain. And the third woman
Ignore the past 3 minutes of this stream.
was buried on top of them, unbound, and above the stones, presumably for symbolic purposes. The location was also quite peculiar, as it was built in a way that during the
Yeah, how's it
solstice,
going, Jaden?
the sun would shine directly onto the silo. So in other words, whoever was behind this was quite twisted, yet unarguably well organized. Now, a less organized, but more strange and rare killing took place not so long before this. However, this incident occurred on the other side of the world, and involved the only known prehistoric sapien to be found in a tar pit, the La Brea woman.
No!
In case you didn't know, Los Angeles is home to the La Brea tar pits, which is actually an active paleontology site that has served as a predator trap for tens of thousands of years.
Getting stuck
as
in
animals
a
who got
tar
stuck in the
pit?
sticky tar would in turn attract many
Yeah, how's it going,
unknowingly
Lazar?
doomed carnivores, and that is believed to be up to 50,000 years old. And through the years, paleontologists have recovered thousands of iconic Ice Age specimens.
Your Jedi
like
mind
direwolves,
tricks won't
ground
work on
sloths,
me?
Saber-toothed
Hey,
cats,
I'm training,
American
dude.
lions, mammoths, mastodons, and then primates. Or rather, a primate. To be specific, a lone woman. Believed to have been
No!
between 18 to 30 years old at death, the La Brea woman is a well-preserved skeleton that consists of cranium, mandible, and postcranial material. In life, she
Man.
likely stood around 4 feet
Man, how do you lose to a tar pit, dude?
10 inches, or 1.5 meters tall, and lived some 10,000 years ago. Or
Do you
based on her
fall in
dentistry,
it, or do you
she sustained
step in it?
herself on
You
a diet
surely have
heavy
to
in
fall in
stone-ground
it.
meal that apparently led to tooth issues and could have caused quite a bit of pain in life. But putting all that to the side, the biggest issue obviously had to do with her being buried in the tar pit. You see, this was quite odd, as Paleo-Indians were definitely well aware that such a pit was dangerous and best to be avoided, which led researchers to suspect that she had a rather nefarious helping hand in ending up there. And upon further examination, they did indeed find that her jaw had actually been broken, while her skull had been fractured and possessed a small hole in it, indicative of a powerful strike, and not one that came from an animal, but rather from a quote-unquote fellow human, which if accurate, would make her
Man, they had domestic violence back in the day, dude. Man.
LA's oldest known murder victim, given the age of the skeleton.
Man.
And though highly debated, it's been hypothesized that given the location, that she
Garenza
belonged to the
noob.
Chumash people.
That's kind of
Yet
crazy,
why she was
dude.
attacked is not known, nor if the attack came from her own group over personal discourse, or if it originated from a hostile party that was looking for resources and potentially viewed her as a threat. Additionally,
Road to
even though
4K.
her wounds were almost 100% guaranteed to be fatal, given the level of medicine at the time, it's not clear if she had
how's it
died
going, Viper?
first
Okay.
and then was dumped in the tar
Got your
pit,
name
or if she
confused.
was thrown in there while wounded, but actually died from sinking under and suffocating in the tar. Now, obviously, neither are good ways to go.
Oosh. All right, who has a set of chompers like this, dude? Put a 1 if you do.
And
Put a
honestly,
2 if
I'm
you
not sure
don't.
if I'd rather get bonked or drown. And
Now, I used to have a set of chompers like that growing up, dude, until I got some braces.
unfortunately, though,
Best
we know that
investment,
definitely happened
dude.
with another specimen, who is now known as the first modern human that we know of to have drowned. And ironically, he did so
4?
in one of the driest places on Earth, the Atacama Desert. This harsh and unforgiving region is found in Chile.
4, you
and
have
is
no
perhaps
teeth.
the oldest desert on the planet, meaning that at any rate, this Neolithic man who dated to 5,500 years ago still lived in the area when it was absolutely bone dry. Yet his body was found in a round stone structure
I gotta go Ronaldo, dude. Mainly because I know more about Ronaldo than I do Messi. But like, I mean, I don't stand on even playing ground, dude.
on top of seashells, which does kind of make sense because he lived on the coast,
Both are
meaning
goats,
that water was
dude.
accessible. Originally, scientists weren't sure what happened to him, as he wasn't super old, being about 35 to 45 years old at the time of his death, and he didn't have any clear fatal injury or disease either. However, because he lived close to the sea and was buried with lots of shells, there was a thought that he drowned. But how does one figure out if a 5,000-year-old plus man drowned or didn't, with just bones?
Yeah.
And surprisingly, you take a look at those bones and look for diatoms, which is basically any member of a large group comprising of several genera of algae. And alas, diatoms were indeed found in his skeleton, implying that he drowned. And let's just say, that's a very unpleasant sign, because the only way that diatoms can end up in one's bones is that you inhale water such that when it reaches the lungs,
you know, apparently drowning is probably the most peaceful ways to go out. I mean, that's what I read about. I wouldn't want to try it myself, and I hope you don't either, dude.
Your pulmonary alveoli rupture, where then salt water rushes into your bloodstream before making it into your bone marrow, and hence the presence of these algae. So, a very brutal ending for an already harsh life. As it turns out, the man was already in very poor condition, showing signs of having arthritis, bad enough to damage his bones.
Eesh.
And his legs are roughed up as well, suggesting a life spent
apparently peaceful, but like, I'm guessing painful at first.
squatting, perhaps to harvest shells, while his arms and shoulders were further messed up, reflecting a life rich in swimming, rowing.
You know how I would want to go out if I was told like, hey, like the world is going to explode in 3 days. This is how I would want to go out. I would want a nuclear bomb to explode 10 feet above the roof of my house. That's how I want to go.
And harpooning, which matches the assumption that he was part
I basically get Thanos snapped out of existence, dude. Actually, it's faster than a Thanos snap.
of a coastal community. And you know, just for a cherry on top, he also appeared to be extremely iron deficient, an ailment that was chalked up to a severe tapeworm infection, which can be common in mishandled fish. And just to make everything a tad bit more tragic, it turns out that he did not die alone, but with three
that's
others.
a pretty good goal,
Another
dude.
male, an adult female, and even one infant. Radiocarbon found that all 4 had died at the same time. But how, you might ask? Well, they lived in a very seismic area, and so it's believed that an earthquake and then a subsequent tsunami is what did them in. But what's rather peculiar is that when they tested the rest of the skeletons for diatoms, they found none, heavily suggesting that unlike the man, they had not drowned. And so now, while it's still possible that an earthquake had killed them from the non-drowning related dangers,
Bro is
it is now less
waterboarded.
likely that a tsunami and earthquake is what did them in. And the current hypothesis is that the man just accidentally drowned, maybe while diving down to forage, while the others just happened to die around the same time.
Bro, I saw that this video's been blowing up on YouTube Shorts and TikTok, dude, but I forgot the channel name, but he's popular for his animations. He has an animation of like, imagine you wake up out in the middle of the sky, sitting on a trapeze. You have no clue how you got there, and you can't even see where the trapeze chains end. For one, no, no, I will not want to imagine that. And for two, no, I don't want to imagine that even more.
Time and location from other causes. After all, the Atacama Desert was and is a very grueling place.
Yeah, it's
where it
that
can be
guy.
hot, cold, and very...
Wait, hold on, I want to try to get his tone right. Imagine that. I can't even get it right. He has a
dry.
certain like tone to him.
Although it should be said that Earth back then was also just in general tough, disregarding location. And sometimes we humans made it more painful than it already was and had to be. I mean, just take a look at this guy, or this girl,
Please
or really
help you,
any of the other
James?
38 humans
With
found
what,
in
dog?
France with holes in their skulls. What you're looking at is not a mass murder
Bro, they're using cookie cutters. You know, that could be like a man, what were they doing back in the day, dude? What were they doing with these skulls, dude? You know, use like a star cookie cutter. You know, pop it out.
crime scene or even warfare, but rather a poor attempt at surgery, also known as trepanning, which, as the skulls show, involved drilling a hole into one's head.
The
It was
human
perhaps
cutter.
Homo sapiens' first
man.
widespread surgery. Unfortunately, the site in France specifically
You know, back in the day, I would not want my head cut open, dude. I would not. Like, I'm not waking up from that. I mean, if I am, like, probably half my limbs are going to be limp, right? Half my face is going to be drooping down.
dates to about 6,500
One lung's
BC,
going to be
making
working.
it one of the oldest, if not the first cases of trepanning
Oh, you remember this. Wait, this happened to you? Wait.
that we know of.
Wait, were you the
But
guy
it was by
doing
no
it
means
or
isolated.
or
And
receiving
multiple
it?
sites have been found with evidence of this strenuous procedure. supplying us with an abundance of brutal fossils, with some studies even suggesting that up to 10% of all Neolithic people under
Like with this dude, okay, wait.
With some
like with this dude, there's 3 holes in the skull. Each one is just like a little bit deeper than the other one. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. Wrong area. Tries it again. Wrong area again. Oh, there we go. Got 3 holes in your head now.
Studies even suggesting that up to 10% of all Neolithic people underwent this treatment, if you can call it that. And in the French site, it was closer to 33%. And given the super high rates, you'd assume it was pretty safe.
Like, what was this? You know, this is making me feel a little itchy inside, but like, what was this?
But, no. It's about what you'd expect.
What kind? Mommy, I got a headache. Okay, let's take you to the doctor real quick. Comes home, half your skull's gone.
From drilling a hole in your head. And less than 40% of the skulls showed any signs of healing. Meaning, more than 60% died.
Yeah, I was going
with
Viper.
The main ways of death likely being infection, blood loss, and of course, trauma to the brain
skull
if the
jug.
surgeon went too deep. And even if they were in the metaphorical clear, healing was no joke.
Looks
often
like a
taking
bite.
several months
It
for the
does.
area to close up. And even then, it was likely you'd still feel awful. Plus the fact you had to endure the surgery itself, which definitely took place with no painkillers or anesthesia. Now to do the surgery...
Honestly, here's some like random grass and twigs that I got on the side of the road, on the side of the trail, I mean, on my way to the surgery site. Here you go. Just eat this random conglomerate of like twigs, leaves, and grass real quick before you know, that's how they came up with medicine, dude. Just like, here, eat this real quick.
It's thought that sharpened stone knives, or in some cases even seashells, were used to carry out the procedure. And people at virtually every age were found having done this. And so looking at the widespread nature of this procedure, you might ask, what was the purpose of this?
Skull, no pun intended.
Basically anything, according to some. Potential reasons included spiritual purposes, treatment for epilepsy, relieving head wounds, which were more common at the time, courtesy of ourselves, or it could have been done for something as simple as a headache. So basically, if you wake up in ancient times and you have a throbbing migraine, best to keep that to yourself. And perhaps surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly...
What are we watching? We are finishing up the video, the most brutal human deaths ever discovered, dude. That is what we're finishing up here.
Surgery remained popular for quite some time, and actually is still carried out today, just with a bit more precision and only done in select cases.
What? Bro, being a doctor back in the day, you were just like, okay, let's peel the skin away from this one area that's causing you harm, and let me take this really sharp tool and just crank it a couple times across the skull. Let me take this chisel and pick and just like hammer a hole in your skull real quick.
Not to mention, we now have much better management for the procedure and pain. And speaking of pain, that's something we seem to have left behind too. Of course, it's still a thing. But I more mean that life used to be so much more harsh and agonizing due to lesser technology. I mean, just ask the girl of Ukter-Mor, affectionately known as Mura by some.
Oh no.
She is an Iron Age specimen that is also a bog body. In other words, a human that was found and sometimes naturally mummified within a peat bog. And just in case you're wondering what that is, it is a wetland that has accumulated peat, surprise surprise, and other decayed organic material. Now, Mura was originally located in the year 2000.
The Lego was real? No, I mean, I might be crazy for this, but like, you know, I don't mind the feeling of like, you know, like lightly putting my foot on a Lego and like pressing down a little bit. I don't mind that feeling. I don't, dude.
Their founders actually thought...
Where it's kind of like when the heat is on in your house and like you have a vent on the floor and you sit on it to get that like really, really hot and warm feeling, dude. Like when I feel my skin like burn, dude, it's kind of like sitting in like a hot shower, like almost, but like with air. I kind of like that feeling.
Thought that she had been a girl that went missing after visiting a club many decades before. But after doing some testing, they realized that she was in reality a 1,000-plus-year-old skeleton who had lived in Iron Age Germany. And despite only being around 17 to 19, had endured more pain than most in their lifetime. Just about every bit of her body had some sort of damage to it. And even looking at it as a whole, researchers concluded that she must have led a life of intense physical...
You know, when I go out, put me in a giant cube of resin, okay?
labor, probably consisting of carrying heavy loads like water jugs as she
Freeze
routinely
me
navigated through the marshlands. Then her head,
like freeze me really
one,
weird,
but
dude.
2 severe fractures,
Be a really
that keeled
wrinkly
over,
man.
demonstrating brain injuries that might have come from attacks by hostile people or even people within her own community, with her shape reflecting blunt impacts. And we do know that head trauma and violence were a bit more common during the Iron Age. But at any rate, she definitely survived that specific ordeal. Yet she likely suffered from frequent headaches and potentially other neurological symptoms.
Man.
And it really seems like she couldn't catch a break, because she also appeared to have a benign tumor at the base of her skull that likely just compounded on her already existing headache.
Like, I mean, back in the day, you can't do anything about something like this, dude. You can't. You can't do anything about this. Like, you can't. You just gotta live with it. And you might die at the ripe old age of 18.
While also causing a curvature in her spine, leading to back pain and chronically inflamed.
She has a 90-degree angle on her spine.
While also causing
Wait, no, it's a 120-degree angle.
a curvature
Just
in her
take
spine,
out the brain.
leading to back
I was
pain
going Sky.
and chronically inflamed legs, which was severe enough to alter her bones. And while her own body seemed to be against her, so did the environment, as there were further signs that during harsh winters, she endured frequent periods of sickness and in her childhood had chronic malnutrition, reflected by the unusual morphology of her bones. So in other words,
just unbend the spine, just like Mortal Kombat, unbreak it.
each day would have been a challenge for her, even if she didn't have to do anything, let alone survive during the Iron
POV chiropractors back in the Stone Age, dude. They tie each end of your body to a horse, stretch out your body real quick. That was actually a sign of it was like a method of like death back in the day. It's like drawn and quartered is what they called it, dude. But like I imagine that felt good for like just a second.
Iron Age, and she clearly did not last long, because
It's kind
even
of the
19
ring dinger,
was
but with a
considered below the
horse.
life expectancy, which at that point hovered at around 26 years old. Now, we don't know what killed her, but it's believed that thankfully,
Yeah, it was an
murder off the
execution
table,
method, yep.
considering that there are no clear signs. And right now, it's tentatively believed that she died in a freak accident.
No.
However, one mystery that remains is that she was found alone and naked, with not even any objects or jewelry being associated with her, suggesting that someone had
stream
altered
streak.
her body after death, and
Dark
then
Angel.
presumably buried her into the bog. Which again makes one wonder, why? Why not just bury her on land? And the answer is that maybe they were trying to hide something.
Now, did you know, like when you crack your neck, you have a tiny % chance of like breaking your neck?
And sadly, not even in death did Moore get a break, as when she was recovered back in the
Get it?
day,
Get a break?
it was done accidentally after a machine had scooped up her remains, but not before ripping them into 100 different pieces that needed to be stitched back together. So with that example alone, I think we can conclude that life can really just be dang hard, which is a fact shared by what is
Glue
currently
the
first
neck
known
back
victim
together?
of the plague, a 5,000-year-old
Man, you sound like a 5,000-year-old doctor right now, dude. Keep these ideas flowing.
hunter-gatherer from present-day Latvia. He showed signs of
Let's rub resin on one end of the head, and then you put that end of the head onto the body, dude.
having died around the age of 20, and likely did so after being bitten and infected by a rodent.
You're sounding like
That
a
unassuming
real
bite
doctor
would
right
one
now.
day come to doom him, as it happened to be laced with a bacteria that humanity knows all too well, Yersinia pestis. In other words, the bacteria responsible for the plagues, like that of Justinian and the Black Death. So, not good. Now, when you get the plague, it usually comes
Man.
in 3 different forms: pneumonic, septicemic,
The
and bubonic.
plague.
And while we don't know which one the man had, it clearly killed him, and unbeknownst to him, would proceed to kill over 100 million other people through the years. Which is crazy. I mean, seriously, nature just seemed to be more messed up back then. And I already know I mentioned it, but we as humanity seem to follow that trend, especially during the Neolithic. And there
I mean, dude, if you lived in any like ancient city, it's GG. It's GG, dude. Like you have to live out in the middle of nowhere, dude, to not get the plague.
is a buffet
Then it spread with I think it was mainly rodents.
of mimed skeletons to choose from per
Just
that time.
remove the
And that pun
arm.
is intended because many of them showed signs of cannibalism. Additionally, we also have nicely preserved specimens that show us
Right
that
after
one could
this,
go
Dr.
through
Cactus.
dismemberment, decapitation, being burned alive, stabbed, bludgeoned, shot with an arrow, or sometimes a combination of all these things together. And obviously, while violence still occurs, in many ways it is comparatively much more tamed in the present. And I should also mention, there is also the trend of doing this to large groups, as well over 100 mass murder sites are known from throughout the world, showcasing ancient man's enthusiasm
What
for
the?
violence and creativity and cruelty. Maybe the takeaway is that for all the flaws of the present, maybe today isn't so bad after all.
Nah, it isn't, dude. It isn't. It isn't. I want to re-like this video. Matter of fact, I want to quintuple, septuple like this video, dude.